Now, if you could just bear with me for 1 minute, I want to kind of pick up where Susan left off and kind of, if you could imagine yourself right now at 14 years of age being in China. You're saying goodbye to your parents as you board a plane with a one-way ticket to America. You're scared and nervous. You've never been outside of China before. You've never been on a plane. Never traveled alone. You know no one at the school you're going to be attending. You know no one in America. You're scared and nervous, but you believe going to America is good for you and will make you stronger because that's what your parents tell you. Fast forward. Imagine for a moment the energy it takes and the focus it takes to get up every morning and make the most of each day, to stay on task, to be productive when you're surrounded by words you don't really know, signs you cannot read, food that is unknown, cultural norms that are hard to appreciate. But combine that with the fact you're 10,000 miles from home, you miss your family and friends. As John Thornton said, who's an academic, arguably an expert on China, he describes it as simply emotionally exhausting. International students need time, patience, understanding, and acceptance of their feelings more than they need academic instruction. And I think when we think about that, it's very powerful. We can imagine ourselves at 14, or our sons or daughters going off to China. And so in the admissions office at Marianapolis, it's our job to figure out who's going to be the best candidate. Who and how can we evaluate these candidates and determine who's going to be successful in our program? Knowing that these are all people, they're all very different. And it's critically important to get as much information as you can about them and as much accurate information as you can. And so what I wanted to first talk about was just the enrollment of international students. And the first slide talks a little bit about what I will be speaking today, tools to help you find the right students, the paradigm shift, which we just briefly spoke about when Tom was speaking, and then where does my commitment to the student end, which is more an administrative issue. So first, I think you have to, the question is, how do you find the right students? And I think an application is a great place to start. Some form of documentation where you get general biographical information, you request standardized tests, you can get teacher recommendations. All that information is vitally important. Now, I'm going to put agents in here because I think oftentimes it's the agent who contacts us, contacts the school administrator and says, I have some students. I have 10 students. I have 5 students. And I think sometimes if we don't have the administrative infrastructure in place, we may kind of let the agent run the process. And that's very, very dangerous. The agent's motives are not necessarily the same as ours. The agent, again, as Susan described, it's the Wild West out there in China. And these agents are, frankly, trying to make a living. They're trying to survive. And so these agents have, you know, in some terms, they've made promises to these families where, you know, you pay me thousands of dollars and I will get you into a school. They also may say, I will do your application. I will get your transfer. I will do all these things. And to a degree, the agent does not know. He is just trying to create a business proposition because he can. He has an opportunity to create a business. And the agent is just trying to make a living. And unfortunately, by our standards, he's exploiting the children and arguably making the process very complicated on our end. And so it is very much our job to have some system behind the agent that's going to help us filter the information that the student is giving us. Just because a student comes from what we determine to be a shady agent does not mean that the student is bad or can't find success in our program. But it's our job to have the system that's going to help us to figure that out. So I think the first thing that we do, once you get your application, once you get this basic information, you need to have some contact with the student. You need to be able to have a phone call at the very least. And the first thing I would say to do with a phone call is confirm that the student lives at the address that's on your application. as basic as it sounds, the agent wants to own this process. They will put their address, their cell phone number, their email, everything on that form. The agent wants to own it because they need to provide value. In some scenarios, they need to provide value, and they want to be the point person for the school. They want to get to know the school. And so the first thing in a phone conversation would be, let's talk about where you live, this information on this application, is it accurate or not? You can also gauge the student's language ability. One of the things we do at Marianapolis that works very effectively is we work with our ESL department. We have an extensive ESL program. And so Karen Bally, who's speaking this afternoon, she and I are very close, and she has crafted a series of questions for me to ask the students so that I have a concrete set of questions that I can ask them to gauge their understanding of the language. Now, I know Susan and Tom both mentioned Skype interviews. I am a huge, huge proponent of Skype interviews. If you don't know what Skype is, it is an incredibly powerful tool. I would encourage you to Google it. It's a cost-effective way you can video your students. So what we do at Marianapolis, for example, we don't do phone interviews anymore. We strictly do Skype interviews. We do more Skype interviews than we do personal interviews. And in some ways, I prefer a Skype interview because I can end it. I can say, okay, this student doesn't know English. I can say goodbye, thank you for calling after 15 minutes. If I really like the student, I can stay on the phone with him and I pick up my computer and I'll walk around the school and I'll give him a tour. And you can really engage with the students that you're connecting with that you think bring that level of language and culture that you want to bring into your community. So the Skype interview, again, and I think it's very important for schools to work together. It's not administrative, it's the whole community. In order to educate these students to the best of our abilities, we all, as an institution, have to be on the same page. And so I value when Karen comes down to my office and says, Dan, what happened with this student? How did this person get through your system? Their language skills clearly are not up to par. And we have a beginning level ESL program. Beginning level. So our bar, and we are working to define exactly what is the TOEFL, what is the standardized test score for a beginning level, intermediate, advanced, and transitional. So we have 4 levels that these different kids come in and we place them at. And it's the admissions office job to make sure that we have the right numbers at each level, that they're appropriate. Now, TOEFL is a very important test that we don't require it yet because it's still very difficult for Chinese students to take a TOEFL and get you that score. We accept a SLEP test. Of course, the problem with the SLEP test is the agents, that same shady agent, he may give a SLEP and all of a sudden the student's got a really high score on the SLEP because that's what the agent wants you to see. So the Skype interview, when you're there on a video conversation with a student in China, you can see how they dress, you can talk to them, you can see their mannerisms, you can pose questions to them spontaneously. One of the things, again, Karen came up with in the ESL department was one of my favorite questions that I ask all the students. There's a series of 5 questions, most difficult to easiest. So it's essentially the same question, but it gets progressively easier for the student to understand, which enables me to understand, okay, where is his written ability? So I ask this question orally, he gives me an oral answer. I then, advantage of Skype, I wind pop him over our interview, the same question that I asked him, and he wind pops me back the answer. I'll take my headset off, I'll leave him there for a few minutes, and see what his response is, and I get the whole timestamp. When did I ask the question? How long did it take for him to write these 2 words or 2 paragraphs? Add it to the file. Now, the question that I like so much is, the most difficult version is, would you prefer to get a homemade gift or one that was bought? It trickles all the way down after 5 versions of it to, would you prefer a gift that someone has made for you or a gift that someone has bought for you from the store? And so somewhere in there, the student is going to give you an oral answer, and then I ask him, okay, can you please give me the same or a different answer, just type it. And you can really size up how well can this student communicate? How well can they articulate themselves, orally and written? And then you have this information that you overlay on top of a test score, on top of a SLEP score, on top of a TOEFL score, on top of teacher recommendations. The personal interview, I think that's wonderful when families come and visit. They tour the campus. It is, again, arguably the best, the most intimate way to have them experience your school, for you to get to know the students. But again, the disadvantage is, in the boarding school at Marianapolis, it's at least a 2-hour commitment, regardless of whether the student is acceptable or not. And you can sometimes know very quickly whether they're acceptable or not. And this is at a school where, again, we have a beginning level program, and yet you still sometimes see kids that just, you don't have the high degree of confidence that they're going to be able to make it. We talked a little bit about the decline of the Korean marketplace, and I think there's one great quote that the Korean Ministry of Education was quoted in the Korea Times in May of 2009 as saying, "We will strengthen English education by inviting more native English-speaking teachers and informing Korean parents of the side effects of overseas studies for children of a younger age. Ultimately, we can solve the problem by improving public schools." Okay? That was a reason why the Korean government is trying to keep their students home. I mean, you can see that, the days of 2007 when SSAT reported over 1,200 SSAT test takers. I think it was 2007. That was the high water mark. To 2010, where the number was 540 or so. It was a 58% decline in SSAT test takers in just about 3 years. Will they come back? I think there's lots of reasons to think maybe not. The surge of the Chinese, the visas, they're able to get visas, and of course that's the reason for the conference. And what struck me as I was looking through the list of attendees here today, I've never been at a conference before where we have day schools, boarding schools, public schools, parochial schools. We have such a very interesting mix of schools and people and offices in the same room, all asking the same questions, all excited about this opportunity that the Chinese represent to us. It's an exciting time, and I think it's going to continue. My last few slides, which actually are, there's a packet in your folder there. This is what I tried to do in here is describe an atypical week at Marianapolis that happened this year. Not only do I do admissions, but I'm the administrator on duty. And so as an administrator on duty, I'm part of an overlay team. We oversee the problems or anything that happens after hours, on the weekends, during breaks, and whatever that might be. And so it was the last Friday of spring break when somehow my phone rang as I'm in bed, and it was a teacher who said, actually it was the head of school, "Dan, one of our students was in a car accident. It's spring break. One of our students, who happened to be from Vietnam, was in a car accident. We need someone to go take care of him because the caseworker at this hospital can't release him to anyone because he's a minor." Okay, so we get on the phone with the hospital, talk to the caseworker. A long story short, it was a major high-speed car accident where the boy he was driving with seized at the wheel, had a seizure, and crashed. And the boy he was driving with was an Marianapolis alum, his friend. That's where he goes for break. And the hospital, they were going to release him to this boy who was driving. Literally, they were going to release him to the boy who was driving, who was also post-concussive. And so, it was a very easy decision to make the drive and go get him. Made the drive, spent the night in my house. Saturday, he complaining of back pain. Decided to take him to the local hospital for different x-rays because having been there the night before, I saw that I got the report of what was happened, what he was released for. Got him at different x-rays on Saturday. Sunday, he had emergency surgery. His back was broken. Meanwhile, same day, our resident students are returning back from vacation. Monday morning, the same week, one of our students on campus, one of the girls, she just wasn't there. Her roommate came in, breakfast, and said, "Oh yeah, Sue, a black car, some guy picked her up. She's gone." Well, what do you mean? Well, where'd she go? Well, she left some vague note about going back home. Tuesday, we learn about another student who her parents dropped her off at the airport in Shanghai. She never made it to America. We checked her immigration records. There was no way to find out where she was. The StISS did not log her in, so we assumed she wasn't in the country, although we found out that's not a reliable way of tracking whether students are in the country or not. It takes time to update the system. So we've got these 3 crises going on. The mom of the boy who broke his back, she, of course, couldn't get a visa to come into the country. So we're working to try and help her get this emergency visa to get her in to take care of her poor son who just had emergency back surgery, who's still in the hospital, for the whole week. It was an atypical week, nonetheless. And I guess the reason I bring up this scenario is because at a boarding school, I see a lot of heads nodding. We know how real this scenario is. And we know where our responsibilities are. And we have the infrastructure to be able to provide 110% for the student. Student interests are always first and foremost for us. And so we are very blessed in that way, in that we can do that. And I guess the question is for some of the other schools, and this is the question for public schools and for parochial schools, is where does that line end? Where does your obligation to the student end? Does it end with the host family? Does it end with the agent? And remember the agent. We talked about the agent and how their responsibility, their sense of how they're going to approach this is not necessarily going to be the same as how you would approach it. They're looking to make a living. And so I put that out there really as a question that I certainly don't have the answer to. Linda, who's coming up next, may have some of the legal sense of what the obligations are, and I'm afraid to think about what happened to. Here I am. I have a kid with a broken back in my house. What the obligations might be. But those are some scenarios to think about. So the conclusion on the students, the one girl, we did get her back. It turned out it was a car service that we regularly use. We tracked her down. She was down in New York City, still in the car, got a hold of the driver, drove her back to campus. The other girl who never made it to America, turns out she flew to Beijing and then went off to some western province with her boyfriend. And the boy with the broken back is actually now, he's still back, he's at school. He's attending classes. So he's a great story. And then, of course, it comes back to, hey, admissions, what's going on here? What are you doing? I thought you guys knew what was going on. And so we pull their files, and I will tell you, these girls were the 2 girls, they were wonderful girls. One of them was an honor roll student. And we have an advisory, we meet 15 minutes every day with our students. We know these kids. There were no signs of any of this sort of thing happening. It just was not, I don't know, just happened.
Well, they learned to be independent Americans.
Yes, very well said. They've been hanging out with Americans, right. That is a great question. Right now we have an admissions office of 3 people, but all of us do other things. So we coach, some of us teach, we're all advisors. So we have different obligations within our school community. Within our ESL department, Karen, how many ESL? We have 4 ESL teachers.
How big's the international student population?
We have 167 boarders, and I think we have, 124 students in the language program. We have more, and 124 students are in the language program. So it is a huge program. It is, again, it's tiered. So we have different levels. The other great thing we do, and in the last 3 to 5 years, we've added a TOEFL testing center. So we are trying to market ourselves and make us unique to the international marketplace. So we now offer TOEFL testing on site. We also have a cultural, what we call, we believe that in order to understand the language, you have to understand the culture. So every month we have an off-campus cultural event. It culminates with a big trip in May where we literally charter a plane and we fly these kids somewhere. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. We took them to San Francisco for 5 nights. We took them to Disney World last year. A lot of educational things you can do at Disney World. We do an overnight in Vermont. We do skiing and snowboarding and ice skating. We do the general, if you grew up in northeastern Connecticut, in New England, any of the sights and sounds and museums that you visited as a child growing up, we take our international kids out to experience that so that they can understand what it means to experience New England. Not just the classroom, but abroad. They often say they don't, and then we say, well, we're requiring it. They can do it, and they will be very accommodating. And we ask them to Skype into us. The parameters are very clear. We send out an email that we've built. Here's what we expect from you. Once we confirm a time, we expect you to call in. And we have 2 Skype accounts at different times, and lots of just accept everyone in, and they Skype in at the appropriate time. If they don't, and oftentimes they're an hour off, we'll just wind pop them and say, I'm on another call right now. Let's reschedule for another time. They will go and set up the account if they really want this. And by and large, we found that we wondered when we phased this in last year, how was it going to work? Because we were so used to phone interviews, but it really was seamless. The other interesting thing, as Tom pointed out, is Skype, though, there are issues with the landline, with the line and the communication. And so you'll have kids that you'll hear them really well, and all of a sudden when you ask them the question, would you prefer a gift, homemade gift, or what? What's that? I can't hear you. Can you repeat? And you start to see that how do they respond when, is it really the line, or is it something else that they just don't feel comfortable with? And that's where you, with experience, get very good at trying to size up, what is this? Is this really the line, or is this kid just doesn't know, the student doesn't know the language? And so, that happens numerous times where the line will go dead. And, you'll have to rearrange, try and reschedule. And so those are things that you learn to become savvy of. By no means is it, is it foolproof, but I think there are really some tremendous advantages to the Skype interview.
Will you be
and another great question, and our first Chinese students had no idea about the Pope. I mean, literally, never heard of the Pope. They don't know Catholicism. They may know Christianity. Our rule is, because we do have Mass every Sunday, and our rule is we require attendance. We do not require participation. Attendance is required. We do not require participation. I think what I've found, we've had students from Kazakhstan. And one of the moms who, I remember she spoke very little English, and we were walking down a path at Marianapolis, and she was almost talking to herself, and she was nodding like she liked the school. And I asked her, through a translator, what is she trying to say? And essentially, she liked the religious component of it. She's Muslim, family's Muslim, and they liked the values that our school represented. Clearly, that is not. It's not necessarily going to attract students right off the bat. They may see it, and they may never get in your pipeline if you're a Catholic school. But I think there are certainly plenty of kids, plenty of students, and we very rarely, and I can't think of a time we've lost a student because we were Catholic once they came into our community. That being said, our religion class is really hard, and some of the kids will say, why do I have to take OT/NT? Why do I have to take these courses, Old Testament, New Testament? And it's those are some of the struggles. We pretty much do it all in-house, and then we do EF tours, to help us with our big trip. But otherwise, we just get the bus and we go, whichever in an hour distance, and go to the Mystic Seaport or take them to, the Yankees, Red Sox, the Fenway Park. We do charge $5,500 for the ESL program, and the way we do it is. The other unique component of our program is that we are cross-curricular. So we offer not just ESL English, we offer ESL Science, ESL History. So we try and make it so the kids can find success, not just in English, but you can't assume they know who George Washington is. Chemistry is a tough class. Biology is tough classes. You have to have vocab quizzes for them, some of the international kids, to help them. They can get the content, but the vocabulary is what's throwing them off. So we offer those courses. Feeling of most of the people I've heard so far is there's a love-hate relationship with agents, and it's a complicated relationship. And I think when we first started, there were agents that were doing every component of an application. It was something that in the admissions office early on we had to decide: do we want to educate the agent on what's acceptable? Do we want to educate them and meaning, do we want to say to this agent, you have to let the student do this essay? You know, we're going to give you a free pass this time because we're assuming you don't know. Or do you just want to say, you know, enough's enough. There's plenty of agents out there. We're just walking away. But I think, again, it comes back to you have to be between the agent and your school. You have to have a system in place there administratively, whether it be admissions or some administrative function. We work with many different agents and many different consultants, and I think we keep a very open mind, and you know, as Tom said, it's a changing market out there, and it's very dynamic, and I think the power of social media, you know, unlike Korea, when I think about Korea, the rise of the Korean market came up before the internet really was booming. So the educational infrastructure of agents and agencies, that was all in place before internet. And so nowadays, the way the Koreans used to do is they used to come and develop personal relationships, visit all the schools, have all these great relationships, and then send their kids to select schools based on who they knew. But nowadays, with these social communication, they don't have to come. Agents don't have to come here to make an impression of your school and to make a judgment of your school. And so it's just so different, even how Korea established itself versus how China is rising now.
Yeah, thank you.